Hang on! Someone, please help her! Call an ambulance now! Stay with me!
The whole dining room went silent the moment the first shot cracked through the chandeliers. A waitress everyone had laughed at 10 minutes earlier, the same woman a table of guests had mocked for spilling wine, was suddenly the only person standing between a masked gunman and Seoul's most dangerous man. She didn't run. She didn't hesitate. She threw her body in front of him and took the bullet meant for his chest. Nobody in that restaurant understood why a woman treated like nothing would risk everything for a stranger. By morning, the whole country would be asking the same question, because that stranger had just made her his wife. Maya Johnson came to Seoul with one goal: earn enough to save her mother's life back home. Instead, she found humiliation, mocked by guests, ignored by managers, invisible to everyone around her. Until the night a private dinner turned into a massacre. The man she saved wasn't just any customer. He was Seo Joon-ho, head of the city's most feared crime syndicate, and the only reason gunmen had stormed the building at all. Her sacrifice didn't just save his life. It exposed her to his. And when the underworld comes looking for everyone connected to Seo Joon-ho, marrying the woman who saved him isn't romance. It's the only way to keep her alive. But even a marriage built on protection can't stop what's coming. Follow to find out what happens when the bullet that was meant to kill him ends up binding them together forever, and drop the city you're watching from below. I genuinely love to say hi and see how far this story has traveled. Maya Johnson had never felt cold like Seoul's cold. It wasn't just the wind that cut through her coat on the walk from the subway station, it was the way strangers looked past her, through her, like she was smoke. Back in Lagos, she'd been surrounded by noise, by neighbors who knew her name, by a mother whose laughter could fill a room even when her body was too weak to leave the bed. Here, she was surrounded by millions of people and had never felt more alone. She hadn't come for adventure. She'd come because her mother's medical bills back home had grown teeth, because every naira she could send meant another week, another month, another chance. Seoul paid better than anywhere she could find work in Lagos, and a distant cousin had a spare room and a lead on a job. That was all Maya needed to hear. She packed 2 suitcases and a photograph of her mother smiling in better days, and she got on a plane not knowing a single word of Korean beyond Annyeonghaseyo. The culture shock hit harder than she expected. The silence on the subway. The bowing she never quite got right. The way people stared just a second too long before looking away, like she was a puzzle they didn't want to solve out loud. She missed jollof rice and church on Sundays and the sound of her mother humming while she cooked. But every night, she reminded herself why she was there, and every night, that reason was enough to get her up the next morning. The job came through. A position at Lucille, one of the most exclusive restaurants in Gangnam, the kind of place where a single bottle of wine cost more than Maya made in a month. She told herself it didn't matter that she'd be invisible there, pouring champagne for people who'd never remember her face. It didn't matter that the uniform didn't quite fit right off the rack, that she had to special order her own from a tailor 2 subway stops away because nothing in the restaurant's inventory came close to her size. All that mattered was the paycheck, wired home every 2 weeks, and the voice notes her mother sent back. "I'm proud of you, my daughter, I'm getting stronger," that Maya replayed on her lonely walks home. She told herself she could survive anything, as long as it meant her mother lived. She didn't yet know how much survival would be asked of her. The whispers started her first week. Elephant waitress, someone called her in the kitchen, thinking she couldn't hear, or not caring if she did. It spread fast after that, hissed between servers refilling water glasses, muttered by the sommelier when she asked him to slow down his instructions. Customers were worse. A businessman once looked her up and down and asked, loud enough for the whole table to hear, if the restaurant was running a charity program. A woman in a fur coat laughed behind a manicured hand and told her companion that watching Maya carry a tray was better entertainment than the string quartet. Maya smiled through all of it. She refilled water glasses with a steady hand even when her own was shaking. She said thank you for dining with us to people who wouldn't have spat on her if she were on fire. It wasn't weakness. It was math. A job was a job, and her mother's next round of treatment depended on this paycheck, not on Maya's pride. Still, Some nights she cried in the stairwell where no one could see, pressing her forehead to the cool concrete wall until the shift bell called her back. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that someone had started watching her. Not with mockery. With attention. He sat alone most Thursday nights, at the corner table with the view of the Han River, always dressed in black, always polite in a way that unsettled the other staff more than it comforted them. He never raised his voice. He never snapped his fingers. He watched the room the way a man watches a chessboard, and somehow, without ever seeming to look directly at her, he noticed things about Maya that no one else bothered to see. How she remembered every regular's order, how she absorbed insult after insult without ever once being unkind in return, how her hands never shook when she poured his wine even though he could tell, somehow, that they shook everywhere else. His name, as far as the staff knew, was Mr. Seo. Quiet. Generous with his tips. Nothing more. They had no idea he was the reason half of Seoul's underworld held its breath whenever his car pulled up outside a building. The night everything changed began like any other Thursday. Mr. Seo arrived at 8, alone, requesting the private room at the back, the one reserved for conversations that weren't meant to be overheard. Maya was assigned to serve him, as she often was now, though neither of them had ever spoken of why that arrangement had quietly become permanent. What Maya didn't know was that the private dinner wasn't really a dinner. It was a meeting. A fragile truce between Seo Joon-ho and a rival faction, brokered after months of blood and buried grievances. And somewhere between the appetizer and the second course, someone had leaked the location to the one syndicate that had no interest in truces at all. The first sign was the silence. The restaurant's ambient hum, cutlery, low conversation, the string quartet's cello, cut off all at once as 3 men in black stormed through the front entrance with weapons raised. Screams erupted. Chairs toppled. A woman's wine glass shattered against the marble floor in the same instant the first shot rang out, shattering the chandelier above the private room's doorway. Maya had just stepped out from behind the private room's curtain with a tray of drinks when she saw him, Mr. Seo, on his feet, gun already drawn, but with his back half turned toward the door as he shielded another man at the table. She saw the second gunman raise his weapon towards Seo Joon-ho's exposed side. She didn't think. She didn't calculate the odds or remember that she'd told herself, weeks ago, never to get involved in anything at that restaurant beyond pouring water. Her body simply moved, tray clattering to the floor, and she threw herself between the barrel of that gun and the man she'd only ever known as a generous tipper with tired eyes. The bullet tore through her shoulder. Pain exploded white and total, and for a moment the whole world narrowed down to the sound of her own blood roaring in her ears. She heard Seo Joon-ho shout something in Korean, a name, an order, she couldn't tell which, and then his arm was around her, hard as iron, hauling her upright even as more shots cracked around them. He fired back with his free hand, precise and merciless, clearing a path through the chaos while dragging Maya's full weight against his side. Glass rained down. A table exploded into splinters. Through the haze of pain, Maya felt herself being lifted entirely off the ground, carried like she weighed nothing at all, out through the kitchen service exit and into a black car that screeched to life the instant the door slammed shut. The last thing she remembered before the darkness took her was his voice, low, urgent, terrifyingly calm, telling the driver to get her to the private hospital, now, and telling her, even as her eyes fluttered closed, that she was not allowed to die. She woke to white ceiling tiles and the low, steady beep of a machine tracking her heartbeat. Her shoulder throbbed under thick bandages, and when she tried to sit up, a hand, firm but careful, pressed her gently back down. "Don't," Seo Joon-ho said. "You'll tear the stitches." Maya blinked at him, disoriented, taking in details she hadn't had time to notice in the chaos of the restaurant, the guard stationed silently outside her door, the way this hospital room seemed to have no other patients on the entire floor, the exhaustion carved into his face that hadn't been there 3 nights ago. "Where am I?" she managed. "Somewhere safe. For now." He studied her for a long moment, as if deciding how much truth she could carry. Then he told her anyway. He told her who he really was, not a quiet businessman with generous tips, but the head of one of Korea's most powerful crime syndicates, a man with more enemies than friends, a man who had walked into that restaurant already knowing there was a traitor somewhere close to him, though he hadn't known how close, or how soon it would cost blood. "You didn't have to do what you did," he said quietly. "Nobody would have blamed you for running." "You were going to die," Maya said, as if that answered everything. In her mind, it did. Something shifted behind his eyes, something she didn't have a name for yet. "I owe you a debt I can't repay," he said. "But I intend to try. Whatever it costs. You will not be harmed again. Not while I am breathing." She wanted to believe the promise meant something beyond obligation. She didn't yet know if it did. She found out how serious he was that same night. Just past 2 in the morning, the lights in the hallway outside her room flickered once and went dark. Maya woke to the sound of a muffled struggle beyond her door, a body hitting the floor, a second gunshot cracking through the silence of the ward. Before she could process the fear rising in her throat, the door burst open, not with an intruder, but with Seo Joon-ho, blood on his knuckles, already pulling her out of the bed and behind him. "They found the hospital," he said, voice flat with the particular calm of a man who had done this before. "We're leaving. Now." 2 more men in black had made it past his guards before being cut down in the stairwell. A third had reached her floor. Maya understood, in that moment, with a clarity sharper than the pain still radiating from her shoulder, that saving Seo Joon-ho's life hadn't ended the danger. It had made her a target too. They moved her to a fortified penthouse before dawn, and it was there, 2 days later, that Seo Joon-ho told her his decision. Cameras were already gathering outside the building. Someone had leaked word that the mysterious woman who'd saved his life was recovering under his protection, and speculation was spreading through Seoul faster than either of them could contain it. "There's only one way to guarantee your safety," he told her, standing at the window with his back to the city lights. "My enemies respect one thing above all else: ownership. If you are my wife, attacking you becomes an act of war against my entire organization. No one will risk that. Not yet." Maya stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "You want to marry me? To protect me?" "Yes. You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said, turning to face her fully. "I know you didn't hesitate. Most men who've sworn loyalty to me for a decade wouldn't have done what you did in half a second, without thinking of themselves at all. It wasn't a proposal built on love, and they both knew it. It was strategy dressed in wedding white, a contract disguised as a covenant, announced to the nation less than 24 hours later in a ceremony so sudden it left all of Seoul whispering the same question. Maya stood beside a man she barely knew, in a dress she hadn't chosen, bound by vows that were meant to shield her from bullets rather than seal a romance, and she told herself it was only temporary. Only survival. Only until the danger passed. She didn't yet know that some promises, even the ones built on convenience, have a way of becoming real when no one's looking. She didn't know how far this war would reach before it was over, or how much of her heart she'd have left by the end of it. Follow along to see what happens next, and tell me in the comments what part of the world you're tuning in from. I always love finding out just how far Maya's story has traveled. The mansion Maya moved into felt less like a home and more like a fortress dressed up in silk curtains and marble floors. Guards stood at every entrance, silent as statues, their eyes tracking every car that passed on the street below. She learned their names slowly: Deputy Han, who bowed to her with genuine warmth every morning; young Ji-won, barely older than a boy, who smuggled her extra portions of the kitchen's spicy stew because he'd noticed she missed the taste of home; and Director Choi, Seo Joon-ho's oldest lieutenant, a man with an easy smile that never quite reached his eyes. It was Choi who unsettled her most. He was polite in the way that felt rehearsed, complimenting her recovery, asking after her mother's health with a little too much interest, always finding reasons to linger near the security room when he thought no one was paying attention. Maya said nothing at first. She was still the outsider, still the woman who'd married into all of this by accident of a bullet, but she noticed. She'd spent years learning to read a room full of people who despised her. She knew what it looked like when someone was performing loyalty instead of living it. She mentioned it to Seo Joon-ho one evening, carefully, watching his face for a reaction. He went very still, the way he did whenever something touched a nerve he'd rather keep hidden, and told her only that he'd look into it. She didn't press further. But she noticed, after that night, that he stopped leaving certain documents on his desk when Choi was in the house. Somewhere in that fortress of secrets, a leak was still open. Maya could feel it the way you feel a draft in a sealed room, cold and impossible to locate. But it was in that same fortress, strangely, that Maya began to feel something unexpected, seen. It happened in small moments. Seo Joon-ho, sitting across from her at breakfast, telling her, unprompted, in a voice stripped of its usual composure, about the boy he'd been before he became the man Seoul feared. A boy abandoned outside a shelter in Busan, raised by an uncle who saw him only as free labor, who'd learned early that softness got you killed and loyalty got you used. He'd built his empire brick by brutal brick because it was the only language the world had ever taught him. He'd never told anyone that story. Not fully. Not out loud. Maya listened without judgment, and when he finished, she found herself telling him things she'd never said to anyone either, the boys in secondary school who'd laughed when she tried out for the choir, the aunties who whispered that no man would ever want a girl her size, the quiet ritual of learning to smile through humiliation because crying only gave people more to laugh at. She told him about her father's death, about the years of scraping together tuition and then medical bills, about how she'd stopped expecting kindness so long ago that his had nearly knocked her over the first time she recognized it for what it was. Neither of them called it what it was becoming. He still referred to her, in front of his men, as his wife with the careful formality of a business arrangement. She still told herself, some nights, that gratitude and safety were not the same thing as love. But she noticed how he changed his schedule to eat dinner with her. He noticed how she'd started humming while she moved through the house, the same tune her mother used to hum in the kitchen back home. Something was growing in the space between two people who'd never intended to need each other, and it terrified them both far more than any gunman ever had. The traitor's name, when it finally surfaced, broke something in Seo Joon-ho that Maya had never seen crack before. It was Choi. Of course it was Choi, the man who'd stood beside him for over a decade, who match had held him steady after his uncle's funeral, who'd sworn loyalty in blood the same year Seo Joon-ho took control of the organization. Choi had been feeding their rivals information for months, starting long before the night of the shooting, selling out the man who'd trusted him like family for a price Seo Joon-ho couldn't yet understand. It was Choi who'd leaked the location of that first dinner. Choi who'd been quietly mapping the mansion's security gaps ever since. He struck while Seo Joon-ho was out meeting with the police commissioner about the growing violence in the city. A meeting Choi himself had arranged, Maya would later realize, specifically to clear the house of its strongest protection. She was in the garden when they came for her, three men moving fast and silent, and by the time Ji-won's shout of alarm cut through the afternoon air, they already had a hand clamped over her mouth and a car waiting at the gate. Seo Joon-ho returned to find his wife gone and a single photograph left on the kitchen table. Maya, blindfolded, a phone number scrawled on the back. The message that followed was simple. Surrender the organization, dissolve every asset, walk away from everything he'd built, or she would not come home alive. For the first time in his adult life, Seo Joon-ho hesitated over nothing at all. He didn't call a war council. He didn't weigh the cost to his empire. He simply told Director Han to gather every loyal man left in the house, checked the chamber of his gun, and said the only thing that mattered, they were getting her back, whatever it took, and whoever stood in the way would not live to regret it. They found her at an abandoned luxury hotel on the edge of the Han River, the kind of building that had once hosted galas and now sat gutted and dark, chosen precisely because no one would hear the gunfire from inside. Maya had been tied in a service room on the 4th floor, guarded by two men who underestimated her the way everyone always had. Right up until she used the years of carrying heavy trays through a brutal double shift to work her wrists loose and drive her elbow into the nearest guard's throat with more force than either of them expected. She didn't wait to be rescued. She freed herself, found 3 terrified hostages locked in an adjoining room, hotel staff caught in the crossfire of a war that had nothing to do with them. and led them through service corridors toward the stairwell just as the first explosion rocked the building's east wing. Seo Joon-ho's men had arrived. The battle that followed tore the hotel apart floor by floor. Gunfire echoed off marble that had once gleamed under chandeliers. Smoke rolled through hallways lit only by muzzle flashes. Seo Joon-ho moved through the chaos with a precision that came from years of surviving worse, cutting a path toward the fourth floor with single-minded fury, until he rounded a corner and found Maya already there, bruised, streaked with dust, herding 3 trembling hostages toward the fire exit with the same steady calm she'd once used to serve wine to people who despised her. Relief broke across his face for exactly 1 second before Choi stepped out from the smoke behind her, gun raised. Everything after that happened too fast for either of them to fully process. Choi's voice, flat with the particular bitterness of a man who'd spent years feeling invisible beside a boss he'd once loved like a brother. The gun swinging toward Seo Joon-ho. Maya, without thought, without hesitation, throwing herself into the space between them exactly as she had the night this all began. But this time, Seo Joon-ho was faster. He caught her by the arm, pulled her sharply behind him, and put himself in the path instead, because he had promised her, in that hospital room weeks ago, that she would never be harmed again while he was breathing, and he intended to keep every word of it. The shot that rang out came from his own gun, not Choi's. It was over before Maya could scream. The syndicate collapsed within days, its leadership scattered or arrested once Choi's betrayal and the rival organization's crimes were laid bare to the police Seo Joon-ho had spent years quietly cultivating as allies rather than enemies. The war that had defined half his life ended not with a surrender, but with the truth finally dragged into the light. In the months that followed, Seoul watched something unprecedented unfold. Seo Joon-ho dismantled his own empire piece by piece, funneling its assets into legitimate businesses, cooperating with investigators, choosing, for the first time since he was a boy in Busan, a life built on something other than fear. He told reporters, when they finally cornered him for answers, that he owed the choice to a woman who taught him what he was actually protecting when he protected the people he loved. Maya, once mocked in whispers as the elephant waitress, became something else entirely in the story Seoul told about that year, the woman who'd taken a bullet for a stranger not once but twice, who'd freed herself and saved hostages who owed her their lives, who'd never once needed the world's approval to know her own worth. Old co-workers who'd laughed at her sent messages she never answered. Strangers stopped her on the street just to say thank you, though she was never entirely sure what for. What had begun as a marriage of convenience, a contract stitched together out of danger and obligation, had become, somewhere between the hospital room and the burning hotel, something neither of them had planned for and both of them had needed. Seo Joon-ho no longer called her his wife with careful formality. He said the word like it meant something, because finally, it did. Maya still sent money home every month, though her mother no longer worried quite so much about her daughter being alone in a city so far from Lagos. And some evenings, when the house was quiet and the guards had finally been let go, Maya would find Seo Joon-ho watching her the way he had that very first Thursday night, not with pity, not with mockery, but with the quiet certainty of a man who'd learned that courage doesn't come from how someone looks carrying a tray across a room. It comes from what they're willing to risk for someone else. That's the whole story. Thank you for sticking with Maya all the way to the end. If it moved you even a little, share it with someone who needs a reminder that real worth was never about how the world sees you, and let me know in the comments where in the world you read this from. I'd love to picture just how far Maya's journey traveled.